Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to Characters Explained, a series where I cover characters from the game Battle for Neighborville to ultimately decide if they're worth trying or not. And in today's video, we have a winner for my semi-weekly polls that I wasn't expecting, Engineer. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get right into it. So before we cover BFN Engineer, we need to first go over the surprisingly complex history of this character. In Garden Warfare 1, his debut game, he had almost completely different abilities. So I'll quickly discuss what these were. He had a jackhammer, which allowed him to move quickly throughout an area, a drone, which works like the garlic drone, and a stun speaker, which he has a lot of now, but back then he only had the options of one or a couple that stayed put on the ground. Garden Warfare 2 Engineer was also changed up a bit. Since the addition of Deadbeard, Engineer had to give up his drone. In compensation, he received what is basically P-Gatling with more recoil and what is considered to be armor in BFN. So yeah, this character has quite a history of unique changes. And honestly, it's hard to compare his BFN kit to his Garden Warfare 2 or Garden Warfare 1 kits. So just for this video, I don't even think I'll try to make comparisons with his abilities. It's simply too weird. So now that you understand this character a little more, let's now cover his stats in BFN. First of all, he's a support character in this game, so like I said in the scientist video, if he seems a bit more on the gimmicky or weaker side, then you know why. So let's start with his HP. Surprisingly enough, he has 125, which makes him quite tanky compared to other supports. And as for his weapon, the concrete launcher, it deals 25 splash damage and 38 direct damage. Yes, 38. However, this is where I should begin to mention Engineer's big quirk. His weapons shoot lobbed objects, similar to how Chomper and Snapdragon fire their secondaries. But his is unique. His projectiles bounce. Yeah, it's pretty strange. Regardless, his damage output is great, but his RPM is fairly low, so you won't be getting those shots out very quickly. Oh, and one more thing I should mention before we move on to his abilities is his jackhammer, which he uses to sprint in this game. He can actually move in any direction with this thing, and he's also completely immune to burrow on a jackhammer. Not the most useful thing in the world, especially in BFN, but it's still pretty nice. Alright, now let's briefly discuss his abilities. These are pretty easy to explain, but like I said before, I can't really make comparisons to anything he once had for the most part, so sorry about that. Anyways, let's start with Bullhorn Swarm. This is BFN Engineer's version of the Sonic Mine, and it basically stuns an enemy for about half a second if they're hit by one of these mines. These little demons happen to track and follow an enemy within a certain range, and there's quite a few of them. A couple of extra things to talk about are that they unburrow any chompers underground, and they also stack the stun duration against an enemy. So yeah, these things are quite a pain to deal with if you couldn't tell already. Next up, we have what might possibly be BFN NG's most infamous ability, the Heavy Helper. So this ability allows Engineer to deploy a turret that has 100 HP, and within a certain range, any ally can get ammo back almost instantly, along with an RPM buff. And if you were wondering, yes, this includes Engineer himself. Remember when I said his RPM wasn't too great? Well, this basically nullifies that. And with certain characters like Engineer, they can shoot infinitely. Now, if this thing does get destroyed in the line of fire, Engineer has to wait 16 seconds before he can place it again. But besides that, this thing sticks around for a long time. Oh, and I didn't even mention the turret's damage. It's no Dark Flower, but it certainly does what it can. So yeah, this ability is really good. And finally, we have Double Time, which lets Engineer place a pad on the ground that buffs the speed of any ally that steps on it for a couple of seconds. It kind of speaks for itself. There's not much else I can add, except for the fact that Engineer can only have one on the map at any given time, like the turret. So overall, Engineer looks to be a really annoying character, but a good one at that. He buffs just about everything, so of course he's gonna be good. But can his upgrades make him better? Let's find out. Let's not beat around the bush here. BFN Engineer is already pretty good, and I'm sure PopCap noticed this because his upgrades aren't as game-changing as a lot of people might assume. That being said, he still has quite a powerful arsenal of upgrades to choose from, so let's discuss a few. I'll start with his upgrades that improve what he's capable of by himself. He has a couple of simple upgrades for the jackhammer, which aren't really that important. I'll show what they are on screen, but I don't really see a purpose in using either. No, the real stars of this show are Rubber and Breakthrough. Rubber increases the amount of bounces that the concrete launcher's projectile goes through, and Breakthrough increases the range of the projectiles. Two pretty good upgrades overall, and they each have their own uses. But if you ask me, as someone who's played their fair share of this character, I'd say Rubber is overall the better upgrade. That's just my take though. Now let's move on to the ability upgrades. I won't go over all of them, but I'll try to cover the ones that end up being the most useful. Let's start with Reinforced, which gives the Heavy Helper HP back whenever a stun mine hits an enemy. The mines also get more HP with this upgrade on, so that's pretty good. Next up are the turret upgrades. upgrades, and I figured I should cover both just to be safe. Starting with Progress Report, this upgrade tells you what HP your opponent is at whenever the turret hits them. I see the idea behind this upgrade, but compared to the next one, it doesn't really compare. The other upgrade I'm talking about is Signal Lamp, which increases the range of the combat buff of the turret by 25%. Now this is a useful upgrade. It's not perfect, but it definitely has its applications. And finally, I'll cover both double time upgrades because they're pretty simple. Turbocharge increases the duration of the speed buff when the pad is touched, while also providing a temporary knockback buff. And as for Rally the Troops, this upgrade reduces Engineer's ability cooldown by 6 seconds whenever a teammate uses double time. Now, of course, you can't just hit your own pad and get this buff, but if you place one down at a spawn point somewhere, I could easily see this upgrade being one of the best for Engineer. And that's pretty much all of his upgrades. For the most part, his upgrades are pretty useful. And with that knowledge, I made 3 different builds for Engineer that you guys could take inspiration from. Let's start with the aggro build. This build has Signal Lamp, Reinforced, and Rubber. I don't think I need to tell you guys just how good this build is at helping Engineer be more aggressive. I mean, the upgrades explain themselves. This next build is a support build with Revive Reward, Turbocharge, and Progress Report. I'm sure the first 2 upgrades need no explanation, but Progress Report probably needs a bit of reasoning. This upgrade is decent at tracking enemies, so I figured it would make a good upgrade for this build. And finally, we have an endless ability build with Rally the Troops, Turbocharge, and Critical Blow. Turbocharge in particular was selected because it rewards teammates who do step on the pads with a longer speed buff, so that makes the pads you place more worth stepping on. So now that we've covered just about everything we could for Engineer, I think it's about time we answer the main question of this video. Is Engineer worth trying? I would say maybe. For as good as Engineer can be, he also undoubtedly has one of the more boring playstyles in the game. And while he's a great character to use for support, he's also one that's an acquired taste, to say the very least. And with that conclusion, this video is now finished. Thank you to everybody who watched until the end, I really appreciate it. I apologize for the audio, I was trying something different, but yeah, clearly in editing this did not work. But don't worry, these videos are going to get better soon, I have a lot planned. Tell me what you guys think about Engineer in the comments, and if you're new around here and you like what you see, then drop a like, maybe even subscribe, and I'll be seeing you guys in my next video. Peace.